Thank you for joining us today. I am the president of the African American Alumni Association at Case Western, and my name is Vera Perkins Hughes. It's my pleasure to welcome you this evening on behalf of the Alumni Association and the Office of Diversity there. The African American Alumni Association started in October 2009, and our purpose is to provide support and networking opportunities to African American alum. And we work to provide a forum for the university to recruit students and foster good friendships and relationships among persons connected with the university. So I hope that all of you have had a great holiday season. We're into 2021. 2020 was a hard year for all of us, but we've made it through. So it's great to see your faces tonight. And before we begin our program tonight, some housekeeping notes are everyone is muted by default. Crystal will be handling all of that if anyone needs to speak. Please remain muted to limit background noise during the program. And if you have any questions, utilize the chat feature and we'll do our best to try to get all of your questions answered. So that we know who you are, we welcome you to rename yourself by clicking on participants and finding your name, then using the more option and selecting rename. I think mine's just come up as Vera. And finally, turn on your video so we can see everyone. Vince, we know you're on the phone, but if anyone is not in the video, we ask you to turn your video on so we can see your smiling faces tonight. I am so happy to welcome you to this installment, our third one, of the Profiles of Inclusive Excellence, a virtual series in collaboration with the African American Alumni Association, Office of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity, and the African American Studies program to highlight the work and research of African Americans and the Black family. And again, we thank you for being a part of this event. We appreciate you. And I would now like to share a little bit of information this evening of our featured guest, the renowned Dr. Adrianne Fletcher. She holds a PhD from Loyola University of Chicago and a master's degree in social sciences administration from Morton Mandel School of Applied Social Sciences at Case Western Reserve University. Her research focus has been on the influence of implicit attitude on decision-making within the child welfare system, as well as on the phenomena of disproportionality. Adrianne has been a practicing social work professional for the past 2 decades with work experience in child welfare, foster care psychotherapy, Indian child welfare, court-appointed special advocates, and veterans who have experienced homelessness. Dr. Fletcher has utilized her teaching skills at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, as an assistant professor, and currently she serves as the Assistant Dean for Diversity and Inclusion and Assistant Professor at Morton Mandel School of Applied Social Sciences at Case Western Reserve University. She also provides consultative services which help to raise awareness of implicit biases and increase cultural humility and flexibility, as well as empathy within the workplace. She desires to continue her research, which seeks remedies for the negative implicit attitude among service professionals who work with individuals who are marginalized, economically disadvantaged, and physically and emotionally exhausted. So our host for the evening will be Dr. Heather Burton, and Dr. Burton is Senior Director for Faculty and Institutional Diversity with Case Western, specializing in gender and racial equality. Dr. Burton also serves as acting co-director for the African and African American Studies program. And at this time, I'd like to turn the program over to Dr. Heather Burton.
Thank you, Vera. Thank you so much. And I want to say welcome to everyone for this evening's Profiles of Excellence, Inclusive Excellence. I'm excited because tonight I get to interview not only my colleague, but someone I consider my friend on campus, as well as someone that I co-teach a class with, that we teach sections of the same class in Mandel. So there's just a lot of commonality and familiarity that if Dr. Fletcher doesn't share aspects of her story, I might jump in and tell her story for her. But so I just want to say thank you and welcome to everyone. And if you have questions, as Vera said, please put your questions in the chat. And I will read the questions and incorporate the questions as we go throughout the interview. So Dr. Fletcher, kind of to begin, one of the things that I've established with the profiles is a question that I based from the movie Brown Sugar. And I don't know if you remember Brown Sugar with Sanaa Lathan and Taye Diggs. And the whole story revolves around hip hop. And there's this connotation of hip hop, that everything is about hip hop. And so Sanaa Lathan does this interview. And the first question that she always asks is, when did you fall in love with hip hop? And so my question to our guest is always in connection with their discipline. So I ask you, Dr. Fletcher, when did you fall in love with social work?
So good question, Heather. I wasn't sure which question you were going to ask out of the box, but since you started with that one, so for me, it was not love at first sight. For me, social work felt very cliche when I initially started my undergraduate degree, career, educational journey, and trying to make a decision about which major I wanted to look at there. Whenever I watched television or read articles, it seemed like the social workers were often people of color, and it felt terribly cliche to me, right? So I was reluctant coming into the profession. It wasn't until I recognized that social work was a field that can allow one to assume various roles, from face-to-face, as far as clinical work is concerned, all the way up to the macro level. And we know right now that soon to be President Joe Biden has already placed at least 3 social workers, right, in his sphere of influence. So once I realized that social workers had a tremendous sphere of influence, that's when I started to warm up to the profession.
That's an interesting concept, because I know, many people, they kind of don't start with where they end up. Mm-hmm. And so there's something that navigates them into that profession. And one of the things that you mentioned was the number of people that you saw, Black people in social work. And that's an interesting aspect when we think about the demographics of social work and what it looks like in our classes, in organizations that we go into. So with that, when you think about social work, if you had to tell someone what was the benefit of being a professor in social work, what's some of the great things about this field, what would you say?
Great things about being a professor or an instructor in this area is, I'll go back to the variability in the work that you can do. The field is wide open. So when we teach in the social work profession, we can always expand it from the micro to the meso to the macro level. And that's one thing that's exciting to me. Social workers don't have this one track that they have to stay in. So the roles that one can assume are very variable. You can almost write your own ticket when you think about the social work profession once you finish your degree and you go out there in the world.
So in that, Dr. Fletcher, one of the things I want to ask you about is your own research. Mm-hmm. And I know earlier on the call, we were talking about your celebrity debut on Channel 5 and, teaching children about racism. But I know that your research goes beyond diversity and inclusion. I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think diversity and inclusion is an aspect that came after you started with the institution.
Absolutely. Yeah. So initially, Dr. Burton, my focus was really on implicit bias as a driver. And this was a handful of years ago, before the notion of implicit bias became the flavor of the day, as it were. And when I say the flavor of the day, I'm not diminishing its importance, but now it to some extent, it might also be becoming cliche because we throw the terminology out there in such a way where it is more performative versus authentic. So yeah, initially my focus was on professionals and how our own implicit biases drive our behavior unwittingly. So we are so well intentioned as social workers. Look, we're out there getting our hands dirty, trying to do all of this hard work, but we forget that there's a piece of us that's often hidden from us, especially as products of folks in the United States. Right? The water gets on us, the biases get on us, and they just become a part of who we are. So focusing on the notion of implicit bias as a driver that we, particularly as social workers, and then other professionals are unaware that these are driving our behavior. And so that's why this is important to me, because I think we need to get in touch with what's back here, what's in the dark.
I love that, especially when you talk about driving our behavior, but then also the aspect of bias being, and not to, negate, undermine, but bias being one of those terms now that we use it so much that doesn't have the effect that it did, especially when you first introduced your research. And it takes me to some of the work that you do on campus, and it really makes it takes me to a space of a couple of words that just recently, and that's microaggression and antiracism. And VP Solomon knows my views for anti-racist work, and that word that we just like to throw around, this anti-racism. And I feel that many people have come about that from Ibram Kendi, and how to be an anti-racist, stamped from the beginning, and the concepts behind that. But in working in diversity and inclusion as a Black woman, and when you hear these words, microaggression, anti-racism, bias, what does it do for you as a Black woman within the spaces?
Yeah, I guess so. When I hear the word, when we start to have conversations about all of those notions and all of that ideology, I really like to wonder with the person who stated the terminology, like, so what do you mean when you say that? Versus me making the assumption that I know exactly what you or they are talking about. So I really try to wonder with individuals, from which perspective are you coming, so that we can be sure as we begin to have that conversation that we're in the same space, right? And that's when you begin to tell whether individuals are performative or authentic, right? Because you really get to hear from which space they are coming.
Mm-hmm. And so in this space, and we know that our institution is a space that we're all working. You serve as one of the diversity liaisons on campus as well as within your school, is that our space, our university is one of the spaces where we're trying to create culture and climate change and working hard. What are some of your challenges as a Black woman within this space?
So I will tell you that probably the biggest challenge is when you are in a space with individuals who are experiencing oppression and who are not experiencing social justice, individuals who are experiencing racism, and you are also in the space where individuals might be perpetuators of oppression and injustice and racism. So when you're in the same space with all of those folks, how do you provide voice for everyone in a way that we are willing to stay in the conversation and we are willing to move the conversation forward? So that is probably the biggest challenge that I face, having folks from different perspectives in the same space and figuring out how then to have the conversation.
Yeah, and I'm going to comment really quickly because VP Solomon just said performative or authentic sounds like a training session. Thank you, Dr. Fletcher.
There you go.
and that's true. And I think that's one of the things. So getting to that, when you're talking about performative, when you're talking about authentic, when you're talking about the work that you do as Assistant Dean for Diversity and Inclusion, how did you make that transition from your role as instructor to now this position that's an administrative position, plus an administrative position in which you get a lot of pushback?
Yeah. So Dr. Burton, initially the my dean reached out to me and said, your name has been floated for this role. Might you consider it? And I had to step away and actually give it some consideration, recognizing that this space, this role is not an easy one. And moving the needle was going to take time. So I will tell you that I had the privilege of creating the job description and everything that goes along with the role. And at the same time, Dr. Burton, I was unclear initially as about how best to move forward. But in true form, troubles simply present themselves. Right? And there are some troubles, whether it be climate or whether it be race or whether it be gender or ethnicity, just kind of rise to the top. And that began to really formulate how best to move forward as far as diversity, inclusion, and equal opportunity are concerned at the Mandel School. So just keeping my eyes open and my ears open to what issues were really floating to the top and what was on the mind of other folks really helped to give me some direction in how to begin to hone this administrative role.
Yeah, because what we hear very often as faculty, when you go to administration, it's the dark side.
Mm-hmm.
And but I joke, diversity and inclusion is a different level of the dark side. It is a different path, and I know you and I have had conversations because when you transition into that position, we had an initial conversation in my former role, and I think I made the statement and said, I'll never work in diversity and inclusion.
Look at you.
Look at me now.
Yeah.
That's why I used to never say never. But in your role as the diversity, as assistant dean for diversity and inclusion, what do you think some of the benefits are? What are some of the things that you have seen that have just brought delight to you?
Yeah. So I'll start with, if I can start on the personal level, this has been a place of learning and personal and professional growth, right? So that's a big piece of it. And another piece is, in this role, I have the opportunity to reach out and talk to people that I would probably never talk to. So if I didn't have to talk to some folks, I will probably never talk to them. But it's opened a door, right? It's opened a door for the generation of initial relationships and then deeper relationships. So it's put me in a space to engage with others that probably my life wouldn't have the opportunity to touch.
Exactly. I understand that because it takes you outside. And I think one of the others, when I think about that, is how you get to expand your role beyond Mandel.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes you a lot further than the Mandel School in this particular role. Are there any other, like with working with students, when students hear that not only are you an instructor, but you are the assistant dean for diversity and inclusion, how do they respond?
Right. So I would say that they probably respond in the same way that maybe some of my colleagues might respond. So there is a notion, and I hope it's an authentic notion, that coming to my office to have a conversation is probably a safe place to come. So if I have a concern, if I have a worry, if it's in this area of ethnicity, culture, race, or harassment or bias, like my office might be a safe place to come. And might I also add, I wear the hat as a clinician. So I also have a box of tissue in my office. Like sometimes I need them. Students think, oh my gosh, this must be for me. And in reality, like, no, it's really for me too. So hopefully students will, somehow it might be conveyed to them that my office is a safe place to have a meaningful conversation.
Excellent. And I know also that you're involved in the community. And so I'm going to switch gears now. I'll probably come back a little bit more to talk about the research and to talk about diversity and inclusion. But let's talk about Dr. Fletcher. Dr. Fletcher, Adrianne, or Dr. Fletcher as a person. When we come to campus, individuals know us in the role that we operate in terms of our profession. But when you think about who you are, tell us about Dr. Fletcher, Adrianne. For instance, what are 3 words that describe you? Yeah. Or what are your 3 favorite aspects about you?
Yeah. And so, Heather, when I thought about the possibility of you asking that question, of course, I couldn't come up with 3 words. And I shared with my husband these 3 phrases, and he distinctly said, those are not 3 words. But I will give you my 3 phrases. And they are, first and foremost, I hope that I am firm yet gracious. So we need to hold folks to whatever standards are out there in the world, yet show grace. And I hope that folks are firm with me, like, tell me the truth. Tell me the truth, even about me, and then show me grace as I'm on my journey. So one word is firm yet gracious. The next word is a lifelong learner. True to our social work profession, we never stop learning. I will never stop learning about being a social worker or about race or ethnicity or gender. And I tell you what, in so many of those aspects, I am on a learning curve. I have made so many mistakes in the classroom. So many mistakes. Yet I hope my students can have grace for me. So a lifelong learner. And then lastly, hopefully I am an invested teacher. Right? Invested in my students, not only their learning, but them as individuals, right, who are also on a journey. So just those 3 phrases: firm yet gracious, a lifelong learner, and an invested teacher.
I like those phrases. I think those are great phrases. And I want to talk about invested teacher. And I want to talk about invested teacher. I'm pulling that phrase out because I was in a meeting earlier today, and we were talking about how faculty are not taught to teach at the college level.
Mhm.
And so we take for granted that all faculty know how to teach when they walk into a classroom. And one of the big difference between K through 12 and college is that K through 12 are trained teachers. They learn how to teach. Our faculty don't learn how to teach. They know how to write, do research. They know how to add, contribute knowledge to the field. So being an invested teacher, what does that look like for you? And why is that so important?
Right. Well, Dr. Burton, I can happily say that my doc program did have a huge teaching component to it.
Send everyone there, Dr. Fletcher.
Right. So I had the opportunity to go into classrooms at Loyola and do a teaching segment. So that's where I began to understand how to engage with adult learners, right? And hopefully, I had a wonderful mentor who told me, and this is something that I'm always fighting against: teaching is not group therapy. Because I have this clinical background, I would tend to lean in that direction. But Dr. Frary helped to write me, and she's always in the back of my head. Teaching is not group therapy, right? So I have to really work on that piece because it comes out of me. It just like flows out of me naturally. So being an invested teacher means that I really look at the faces of the individuals on the screen, and I really wonder, like, where is, I see one of my students, I see a couple of my students right now. I see Ariana and I see Mai, and they know that in the classroom I'm looking at their faces. And I'm wondering, so what are you thinking, Mai? Right? So I wonder because learning is it's the synergy that occurs between the instructor and the student, and then between all of the students and each other. So it's important to create an environment where that can occur, right? And then there's content. Right? So it's all of these things at the same time.
Yeah. And I, it speaks volumes to have your students join tonight to show the respect level of how they feel about you specifically in the classroom and as a professor. So, accolades to you for even having students on the call. We won't put the students on the spot to say, what do you think about Dr. Fletcher? But so what most people may not know is your story of how you got back to Cleveland. And why you are back in Cleveland. And so just kind of talk about that transition of being a Clevelander, leaving, coming back, and that. Fill the audience in on that a little bit, Dr. Fletcher.
Sure. So in 2005, my family had the opportunity to move to northeastern Wisconsin. We were there for 10 years. And during that 10-year period, I was able to complete my doctoral degree. So I would drive every weekend from northeastern Wisconsin to Chicago, Illinois, where I took part in their weekend program. It was an amazing program. It's no longer a weekend program, unfortunately, but it was then. So my weekends for 2 years were spent in on the Magnificent Mile. It was an amazing experience. My children were old enough to give me space to do that. And one of them said, I think you have another life in Chicago. and to some extent I did. I was able to bring them along with me a few times to class. But anyway, I spent that time at Loyola, and then I worked at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. I was on the tenure track there in their School of Social Work. We had a master's program and a bachelor's program. So I had the opportunity to do my research there and cut my teeth in working with public child welfare agencies as they thought about issues of disproportionality. While I was there, the state of Wisconsin ranked number 3 in disproportionality as far as children of color were concerned. So I was in the right place at the right time to do the work. And then in 2016, I believe it was, a position was posted at the Mandel School. And I thought this might be a good time to think about transitioning back home. And so here I am with this appointment.
Well, we're glad you're back home. And what are some of, I should say, since you are back home, but you know home, what are some of the things that you like about Cleveland?
Right. So first and foremost, Dr. Burton, primarily my family is here. They are here, which is always good. My 2 sons are still in Wisconsin. They think they're Wisconsinites. I keep telling them that they're not, but they don't believe me, right? So both of them are there. They finished college, they are gainfully employed, so they are living their best lives in northeastern Wisconsin. But here I have a larger portion of my family, and I just love hanging out with family. One of, I don't know if you can call this a hobby or not, and Lisa, you heard me mention this earlier today on a call. Every year, once or twice a year, we take a trip to Hocking Hills, Southern Ohio, and we rent a great big cabin, and we just hang out. We hang out. So being here means I can hang out with family and kind of rejuvenate and rest.
And I can see that family is important to you. And so it kind of leads into my next question of what's important to you outside of the institution. And so we know family is important. But what else? Are there any other things that are important to you outside of the institution?
That's probably the biggest piece. I will tell you, I miss Kane Park and jazz concerts. But hopefully this year, once we all have our vaccines, we'll be able to step into that. I really like the demographics in the greater Cleveland area. You know, most places you go, you can run into people who look like you and also people who don't look like you. And what that does for me is expands my horizons. It affords me the opportunity to reach out and touch other cultures and for them to reach out and touch me. So this diverse population is very meaningful to me.
And speaking of reaching out and touching, I just want to read something for you from the chat from Bernadette Kerrigan from First Year Cleveland. She had to leave, but she wanted to say, thank you, Dr. Fletcher, for all you do for our community. First Year Cleveland appreciates you. So knowing the love that extends beyond Case Western Reserve, because I think we all have an admiration for you within the institution, and you see that it overflows outside. And I want to go to the just the brief snippets that I saw yesterday with the interview and teaching your children about racism. How did that come about? And what can you tell us as an audience about teaching our children about racism?
So Heather, you may know that I spent a little bit of my time in the clinical world at the Hannah Perkins Center for Child Development. And there I had the opportunity to work with primarily children. And so what I recognized is that oftentimes families, moms and dads and aunties and uncles and grandmas and grandpas have a hard time talking to their children about this notion of race and what it does to them and what it does to others, right? It's almost as hard as having a conversation about where babies come from. It's like, right, do I really have to touch that? Yeah, that is something we have to touch, but it's something until now we have not touched. So I think it kind of evolved. This notion of trying to figure out a way to have meaningful conversations with our children without causing them too much anxiety.
and which is needed. I go back to Ibram Kendi and how he's created that series for his book for Stamped, and created the baby version, the teen version, and I heard one interview say the old people's version.
Right. Yeah.
But the adult version. And so thinking about, these are conversations that we have to start having earlier. In your conversations about race, what has been one of the hardest things on campus that you've had to deal with having the conversation around race?
Yeah, probably, again, I would go back to the just the dynamic of having folks from different worlds or different perspectives and ideologies in the same space, and having to manage the tension that occurs when you have a mixed group versus a caucus, right? Very different feeling, very different conversations. But when we have different folks from different perspectives and views, and it doesn't have to be race, it could be gender, it could be religion, it could be ethnicity. There are so many diverse thoughts and notions. So it's managing that piece. It's probably the most difficult piece, because it's always my goal for folks to feel safe, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy ever.
Yeah, never easy and never comfortable.
Right.
It's
exactly.
one of those things that I always joke that when you say the word race, people usually go,
Right.
and start looking all around the room instead of dealing with the conversation.
Right. Exactly.
I know within Mandel, students have mentioned to me, as well as sharing with you and others, a lot of the thing, especially when we talk about our students of color, our Black students, some of the dissatisfaction that they've had with certain things. But what I want our audience to know tonight is, or hear tonight, is some of the things that you have put in place. What most people probably don't realize is the work that you've done in Mandel, and a lot of the programming and other aspects that you've added. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So one of the things that we've done as a school that I was a part of, I didn't necessarily initiate this, but I certainly do feed this piece, is that on our webpage at the Mandel School, we have a resource page, right? And so we have this icon. If you click on that icon, you will find numerous anti-racist numerous anti-racist resources to help you learn and to help you think and to help you process. So that's one piece. Another thing that we've done is we have done a complete curriculum override. And there was a course, and Dr. Burton, I think you taught this course, which is SAS 484, Theories of Oppression and Social Justice. Did you ever have that opportunity?
No, I didn't. I was supposed to teach, but I didn't teach it.
Okay. So that was the course. It was like this one-stop shop for all things gender, race, ethnicity, religion, you name it. Like, it was all in this one class. And it was interesting that primarily people of color, not only people of color, taught this class. Tough class to teach, y'all. Just a tough class to teach. So one of the things that we've done in the new curriculum was to dismantle that course. I was initially very anxious about that, but we've dismantled the course and taken all of the theoretical perspectives out of that course and attempted to weave them throughout every course in the new curriculum, right? So that discussions about gender and ethnicity and race and culture and religion should be found in every last one of our courses.
So my question now, kind of on another page, is how receptive were the faculty to that change?
Yeah. So I think it took a minute for faculty to really begin to embrace it. And, one can have their own anxiety about how well then other faculty will be able to engage some of these concepts. And so since we just rolled this new curriculum out this fall, we don't have outcome data yet. So we'll be talking about these things this spring and I'm sure during the summer to determine how well it went, because we don't know yet.
That's a big thing. I mentioned this meeting that I was in earlier and talking about just that when we talk about culture and climate change, that it has to be interwoven in every aspect of the university. It can't just be the people doing diversity work to create the change. Everyone has to take a level of responsibility
Correct.
for implementing diversity and inclusion. with diversity and inclusion, where do you see Mandel School going? What would be your ultimate goal for the Mandel School as it relates to diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we as faculty, staff, and students as they come and go have to create a climate where everybody feels like they can stay. Like, so the tension isn't so great that I have to see my way to the door. So first and foremost, it's about creating and I'm trying to be careful here not to say a welcoming environment, because what does that really mean? I don't know. But
those are those words again. Those are those words we love.
We all know what the environment feels like when we step into a space and we take a deep breath and we say, all right, I'm going to work to stay here. And when people come up to me and they say, hello, welcome to the space. And I say, okay, maybe I really can stay here. So first and foremost, we have to alter or amend the landscape so that our student retention numbers go up. Because we do have a retention trouble with underrepresented minorities or minoritized individuals. So first of all, we have to create that climate where students feel okay about staying. And then we have to do the same thing on the staff level. Do staff feel like they can stay in the space without having to defend their gender or their ethnicity or their race every day? Like it's like becoming an apologist every day. I have to justify while I'm in the space. So I'm looking at Dawn and I can wonder what her experience has been, as a staff person. And then we move it up to the next level, which is faculty level. What is the experience of faculty? I know there's a push for cluster hiring, which would be great if we can move that forward at the university, which would create numerous individuals of different race ethnicities who can support each other. Right. So it's really about that initial bubble, that initial climate that folks walk into. So if I could see a change, the landscape would be amended and the air would be fresh when you walked into the space. Right. And students would sense it, staff would know it, and faculty would live it out on a day-to-day basis, especially in the classroom, especially when they engage with students who have gender minorities, or students who are other ethnicities or races.
To follow up, there was a question, and I don't know if you want to explain, what is cluster hiring?
And I'm sure either you or Dr. Solomon can hit on this too. So the notion is with cluster hiring that you would hire several individuals who may be BIPOC, and like one might work in Mandel, one might work at Weatherhead, one might work in nursing, one might work in arts and sciences, but all of these individuals would be in the same cohort. They would engage with each other and provide support to each other. So we increase the likelihood of retention. Because I tell you, sometimes folks of color run from the academy. They'll stay a short time and they say, the air is not fresh, I can't do it, and they leave.
It's taxing.
It is taxing.
It's taxing when it's only one, which is that whole conversation I keep trying to get us away from, and this idea of we have one. We've got one woman, we've got one Black, we've got one Hispanic. We're diverse. No, we've got to get away from. I saw VP Solomon unmute. Right. He probably wants to say something about cluster hiring. I see it all over his face.
Yeah, well, we've been having conversations about it. And actually, Lisa had posted in the chat that it's kind of like the Posse Model. But we hear a lot about isolation, that sense of isolation. So the cohort that Dr. Fletcher was talking about allows, it feeds that sense of community so that there is a kind of a ready-made support system. I mean, they just can't be left alone. The support has to flow from other areas as well. But by having that cohort, that posse, that group together, it allows to create synergies and to build some strength. And interdisciplinarity is also something that is characteristic of cluster hires as well. I'll be quiet.
Right. Don't take Dr. Fletcher's interview time. No, I'm just joking. But I do have a question for you from the chat. How do you prepare students for the corporate business world, which may be unaware of your initiative?
So students, and again, I'm not sure who asked the question, but if you wouldn't mind kind of rephrasing it for me so that I can make sure I understand the question.
So Nancy, would you like to unmute so that you can clarify the question?
I will. I worked in corporate America as a diversity manager, and I know how difficult it is for people who are different to make any progress. And so I just wondered how you would. It sounds like the things that are being done on campus are really cool, but how does a student translate that when they go out into a world that doesn't
Right.
go that way?
Right. And so thank you, Nancy, for asking that question. The truth is, many minoritized individuals, again, whether it be religion or ethnicity or gender, already understand that the journey in corporate America is going to be a difficult journey. They already know that from experiences in the academy, right? And so you reinforce the importance of building a network. If it does not occur on the inside of your corporate office, make sure that you have a network on the outside of your corporate offices in order to provide support for you so that you don't feel that you have to leave the organization. So you need a support network wherever it comes from. And again, I want to really emphasize that minoritized populations unfortunately already know what it's like to be isolated and be that only individual. And one of the things that we can do to support ourselves is to build a network somewhere in our life in order to support us on that, on our journey in the corporate world.
So not necessarily in that corporate world, but just have a network of support wherever you go.
Right. And it would be ideal if it could be in the corporate world. But one of the tough pieces is that if I stepped into the corporate world and I were the only Black female, could I then create a network? Right. So what we would prefer to see, as I talked about climate, amending the climate at the Mandel School, what we would really want, Nancy, is for corporate organizations to say, we need to create something, right, in order to support underrepresented minorities. Because if those individuals at the top of the hierarchy, as it were, take a slice of the pie, the chances of success increase versus if I were to walk into the space and begin to create something, right? So it's a different, it's going into a different door. So I hope that helps.
There's another question for you from the chat. You've become a mentor to so many people here at Case Western Reserve. Who are the individuals to whom you turn for mentorship or support?
Right. So first of all, I'm going to say you don't kiss and tell until you're ready to do some other things. But let it suffice to say that I do absolutely have individuals who I know that I can go to and speak candidly. Some are within the academy and some are outside of the academy, right? So there are places that I can go and I can just tell the truth. I can let all of this short hair down and say, so this was my experience today. And I'm wondering if you can help me make meaning with this experience or with that experience. So there are some within the academy and then some outside of the academy.
And like you said, there have to be, and then there has to be that confidentiality of who, especially when we're talking about in the academy, who you are, who's your release, who do I talk to that I can navigate the space with and work through. Mm-hmm. When you began to think about, let me go back. I see another question in the chat that I want to ask before I ask my question. Are there any books that you would recommend that the audience reads, Dr. Fletcher? So what are some of your favorite books, and then what are some that you just may recommend?
Right. So right now I'm teaching a course on implicit bias during this semester, this January semester. And the text that we're using is by, she's a linguist. Her name is Jane Hill. And the title of the book is The Everyday Language of White Racism. And I want to tell you, it's not a white fragility book. That's not it. Right. So she takes this linguistic perspective and she helps us to see how everyday language has caused some of our racist beliefs and systems to perpetuate themselves. Everyday language. So Dr. Burton, is language that I use. It's language that you use, unless we become aware of it, right? So that book is really dense, but it's a good read. Yeah, so that would be one. I really like, I'm just trying to be really selective here. Um, Dorothy Roberts has written a book called Killing the Black Body, and that book has to do with birth control and other things that have been done to female bodies. And then lastly, Harriet Washington's book, Medical Apartheid, which gives a historical view of the medical experiments that have taken place on the Black body. And so she gives us historical perspective and brings it up to date.
Well, we are going to wrap up shortly, but before we wrap up, I do want to say you've done so much throughout the course of your time here at Case Western Reserve University. When we think about, I have a two-part question for you. When you think about your work at Case, when you think about just your life outside of the institution, what's next for Dr. Fletcher within the institution, and what's next for Dr. Fletcher outside of the institution?
Those are tough questions. So let's think about within the institution first. Obviously, those of us who are in the academy really embrace the notion of academic freedom, right? So I really like to begin to discipline myself enough in order to produce another article or two, to really think about on paper some of these experiences that I've had with trainings and engaging with others. So I'd like to do more writing. So that would be a piece that's next. If the opportunity arises to do this kind of work on a broader scale, I think I would really enjoy that. And I say that because I believe right now the iron is hot, right? And it's not going to always be hot. I believe we are riding the crest of a wave. And honestly, we need to ride this wave as long as we can, because what we recognize is one day a conversation about race and ethnicity and gender and culture is going to fall out of favor. We won't be talking about it anymore. So right now, while we can, I want to do all that I can outside of the academy and inside of the academy.
I love it. I love it. And if we could have more people to have that same attitude of doing all that we can on this wave of race and gender and in those conversations that are needed to move us forward. Dr. Fletcher, do you have any last words? Anything that we haven't covered? Anything that you want to share about Dr. Fletcher, your research, or anything?
Yeah, I guess the biggest part is I'm going to make the assumption that most of you are on this call because you have some burden for perhaps these notions of race and ethnicity and religion and gender. And so what I would like to say to you is to be vocal, be honest, and to do you. Share this information in a way that is authentic to you. Right? Because that's how we communicate in such a way that people recognize our honesty as we touch these very, very important topics. So please, by all means, talk about these things, think about these things, and do it in a way that's authentic to you. Be true to yourself as you move forward in this area.
And so I have a follow-up question with that really quick. How would you suggest, or what would you recommend, especially when, we have students on the call, for knowing your authentic truth, for getting to your authentic truth, to be able to have the conversation?
Yeah. So I think really the best thing to do is to first and foremost raise your own awareness, know who you are, know what your biases are, right? And then when you are presented with an opportunity to have a conversation with someone, make sure you're having a conversation with someone who really wants to listen. Do not beat your head against the wall, right? Talk to people who wonder. Talk to people who want to know. Talk to people who really do want to think out loud about these topics. So I'm not sure if that really answers your question, but find out who your authentic self is. Become aware of who you are, all of your biases. Because if we're authentic, we have the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like my ugly wakes me up at 2:00 in the morning and I say, oh my gosh, why did you say that? Right? So we all have all of these components. Reckon with them. Don't ignore them. Don't be afraid of them. They are part of the whole package. So recognize that and then engage with others who really want to know right? Not with people who want to fight, like, don't have time for that. But if you want to know, I'm your girl. Let's talk, right?
I think that's the one of the best advice. What I would say that to give people is that in this work, you can't change everyone and you can't have conversations with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And so people who are not receptive, I always say, don't waste your time. You're wasting energy, because this is when you say recognizing your true self.
Yeah.
My true self is I get tired of ignorance and stupidity when it comes to,
Gotcha.
to these issues. And so if you say something to me that sounds, it may send me to 2000, and knowing that I can't be at 2000 at work, I have to walk away from that space. And Janetta's been in situations with me where I've had that space on 2000. And so knowing that you can't have these conversations with everyone. So I thank you for that advice. And I thank you for sharing yourself with us tonight, Dr. Fletcher.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Of course.
You good people. Hi, Mary.
And I wanted to say, I wonder if, I think a lot of these people might be on the call just because they like Dr. Fletcher. So that's probably a plus also.